I firstly extend my congratulations to Minister John Paul Phelan on your appointment. I wish you well in office, and I have no doubt that you will bring your wisdom and experience of local government to the task that you now have before you. And undoubtedly, while you do your national work, Cara Kilkenny will benefit immensely. I too am delighted that the committee has concluded its work in relation to this long drawn-out issue, needlessly so, in fact. But anyway, that's the way it was. It shows a complete failure in politics, that for so long we had to endure the debacle that Irish Water in its infancy actually was, and the various scandals that tumbled out in terms of consultancy fees and so on. The fact that there is now £500 million spent on meters that are no longer required is something that the political system should reflect on, because another situation like this should be avoided at all costs, and we should learn from our mistakes. The fact that in this bill, where they are measuring the consumption of water, and there will be penalties for those that will abuse the system or waste water, it will be interesting to see how that works for the many households that do not have a meter. So whether it's a guesstimate or whether it's someone that's going to sit in the house and watch what you do with the use of water, I don't know. But it clearly shows a continuation of the poor management of the introduction of such a system of management for the water services. I am concerned for the many employees of local government who are now employed or used by Irish Water. It seems to be a complete circuitous route that you have to take to make the complaint to Irish Water, to have one of the former employees or the local council go out and fix it. Now, having said that, I want to acknowledge the efficiency of the email system that is operated by Irish Water for responding to such matters. But it really does go to show that this is an overlaying of a bureaucratic structure on top of a system that was working reasonably well, with the exception that it was starved of funding by successive governments. That's always wrong. And I wonder what the county managers are going to do now all over the country. They don't collect waste. They don't operate housing. That's been outsourced as well. They now won't have to worry about water charges or commercial charges. So they have more time on their hands now to do reports and to manipulate councillors into positions of accepting the various rates and so on that are put before them. So, in terms of the legislation here before us, I am anxious that it is made quite clear that the Comptroller and Auditor General will be in a position to audit the spending of taxpayers' money by Irish Water. I think it was €2.6 billion went into Irish Water up to the end of 2017. It will take €1 billion a year in terms of the funding that will be required. It will and is now collecting the commercial water charges. So there is a significant amount of money that is going into Irish Water that gives the reason why they should be held accountable by the Public Accounts Committee and by the Comptroller and Auditor General. And while I understand that part of that fund may be subject to an audit by the CNAG, I would like it to be more specific in the legislation so that there is no ambiguity about it and there is a clear message that we are now counting what gets spent and we want to see value for money for the Irish taxpayer. In terms of the local government fund, I know that the local property tax will now go directly to the local government fund. But I am concerned that we would say in this House that the road tax, while going to the central fund, will inevitably contribute in some way to the funding of Irish Water. It would be far better that we would say the local property tax and the road tax would go to the local councils to fund the much-needed services that they are now finding it hard to deliver because the funding in various areas has been cut. And it would send out the right message that this money is for road tax roads, the LPT is for something else, it's managed through the local government fund, and that the taxes to run Irish Water is actually tax from the central fund. I think that that is a very, very important message to clarify in the context of this bill. And the bill doesn't necessarily make that statement. In fact, it makes quite a different statement. In terms of the reduction for medical use, it is now left to the Minister to introduce some guidelines on this. And I would like to see, Minister, that whatever those guidelines are, that the bar won't be set so high that it will inflict further difficulty on families who are dealing with medical issues and require more water in use than what is the norm. And when you get down to dealing with that, you will find and see that it's a pretty complex question that will have to be answered. But I would like to think that you or the Senior Minister will fall in favour of the citizen not putting a further obstacle in that person's way. I further want to draw your attention to the fact that there is no criteria set down for the connection fees that now are being imposed by Irish Water and that will be imposed in the future. The cost under the councils was different and it was cheaper. The cost under Irish Water is significantly higher. I have seen in my constituency office complaints registered about single household connections for water running at a rate of 10,000 to 12,000 euro. Now, it may be a once-off. I don't think that it is. And I think that it is another way of raising money from people who are hard-pressed, setting out to build their homes, receiving little or no support from the banks or anybody else, and now they're faced with this enormous charge. You have to set down some form of guidelines and limits so that Irish Water doesn't run away with itself and see this as another soft touch in terms of raising funds. In the context of rural schemes, whether it's water or sewage, there is a need for a clear message, a message that insists that Irish Water cooperates with the many volunteers all over the country that run these schemes, and that they work with them in a positive, proactive way to bring the schemes into their care and into their system of repair and funding. And I think that by doing it that way, we will be acknowledging the volunteers that are there presently working to do this, and you will enhance the scheme itself, whether it's water or sewage, and I think it's essential that you would undertake to do that. There is an awful lot of suspicion around this bill, because in it, 1.7 in terms of the usage, and the majority in this House can change that if they so wish, if it's recommended to them. Now, we're in a strange kind of politics now. That could change too, whereby the majority on that side could decide we're going to introduce or reduce the amount of water limited to a household. And then you would have substantially more paying for water. And the whole debate from the very election of 2016 and before was about eliminating water charges. The majority in this House, had a vote been taken on that, would have been against water charges and against Irish Water. And the one single thing that I see lacking in this bill is the fact that Irish Water, which was described on an ongoing basis on this side of the House as being a gold-plated quango, that has survived, with the exception that it has a five-man posse now looking over its shoulder. But in my opinion, this piece of legislation is probably the best way and the most tangible way to explain this new farce of what we call new politics. It is neither here nor there. It has taken a lot of time at committee, a lot of time in debate in parliamentary party meetings and so on. But the sooner that we get real with the electorate and tell them exactly what's in the legislation, exactly how it's going to work, and really take out the ambiguity around an awful lot of these issues, the better. And I think that we have to reflect, our actions in here rather, have to reflect what the desire is outside of this House in terms of managing our affairs. And I don't mean that as being just anti-water charges. I mean generally. Owen Murphy, our Minister, and I wish him well too, when he introduced this bill, he said he wasn't, I think the words he used, he wasn't particularly proud of it, or something to that effect. And I think that too explains just exactly how uncomfortable some are with this legislation, and indeed other pieces of legislation. Because the information that you can get directly from officials is actually much more clearer than some of the information that comes through the political parties, for one reason or another. So I would ask you to take note of some of the issues that I've raised, because I believe they're a concern not just to me but to the public. And I would encourage greater clarity, I think, in the context of some aspects of the legislation, because it's not clear. And I think that it's wrong to put local government taxes, like road tax and LPT, well, road tax in particular in this question, into a fund where people see it being diverted to Irish water. But for me, you know, I'm very sceptical about the arrangement with Fine Gael. I see this as a piece of legislation that's just a bit of fudge, and I would hope that in future, you know, we put the country and the affairs of the state first before we go tinkering around politically with issues that have to be addressed.
McGuinness.